Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm Stephanie Zindala. I am Programming and Outreach Specialist at LibraryLinkNJ. I am so thrilled to have this conversation on navigating new adult books. So here with me, I have Stephanie Smith, Head of Youth Services, and yet another Stephanie from Gloucester County Library System. Also from Gloucester is Alicia Cerone, Adult Services Librarian and Social Media and Marketing Coordinator. So do you guys want to go ahead and get started?
Okay,
Sure.
yes. Thank you guys for joining. I'm pleased to see that there's a mix of YA and adult, because it's fun. We're both in the same boat. One's YA, one's adult. So the reason why we kind of wanted to have this conversation, we came across a book in our teen section, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with it thanks to TikTok, called A Court of Thorns and Roses. My teen librarian is absolutely in love with this book, and she's like, yeah, have you read it? Because it's a lot. So I read the whole series, and it's very, very, very spicy if you haven't read it. And so it kind of prompted the question of, okay, so is this adult? Is this a young adult? Or is this whole new subgenre called new adult? And that's kind of where Alicia and I started having a discussion of, okay, so where does this new adult come from? Where do we put it? What budget does it come out of? Like, is it necessary? Like, we had all of these different questions about this whole new genre, which kind of is what led us to LibraryLinkNJ, because we're like, well, if we're thinking about it, I'm sure other librarians are thinking about it, but we haven't really seen any discussion about it being broadcasted anywhere. And it was a little late to get into NJLA. So thank you for LLNJ for letting us having this shared discussion. So that's kind of our background of how we came to where we are now. And so we had different ideas. So this new adult, when we look it up online, there's really nothing to fall back on. No. There's nothing, there's not like, yes, if it's this and this and this, it belongs in this section. But some of the questions that we had was, what constitutes new adult? What authors would you put there? What's the target audience? What are some of the parameters that we use to do it? And then if we decide to have a new adult, where does it go in the library? Does it get its own section? Does it, who checks it out? Questions like that. Anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think we had a big discrepancy because obviously both Stephanie and I come from different backgrounds of librarianship. Stephanie's always been youth services. She's the head of our youth services department here at the Gloucester County Library System. And I've always been an adult services librarian. So we definitely come at it from two different viewpoints. Stephanie is from the advantage of all of these teens should have access to these materials. And I come from the perspective, I'm like, well, they still have access if we move them to the adult collection, because other adult collection materials contain the same things. So we don't quite know where we would make that definition of, is this a new adult? So should it be an adult? Or is this new adult, but it's still okay for YA? So we wanted to kind of prompt that conversation because we don't know. And we want to kind of get the opinions of other people and other librarians, especially, around the state. So I do know in the chat, I'm so sorry. I called you out and I don't remember your name, but one of you is actually a new adult librarian, or you focus on new adult. So I was hoping maybe you can jump in and save us, and maybe you have some ideas will help us along.
Hi, yes,
it's Haley. That's right. I knew I would recognize your name.
So technically, I am a library aide. So I work at the circulation desk, but my library was facing the same questions that you were having. That we were trying to get college age, a little bit older people in the library. And so when I started there, I was like, I want to create a new adult book club. Because I was like, we have a young adult book club, we have a kids book club, and we have older adult, but we don't have anything for my age. And so I created that. And then my director noticed that we don't have any programs for new adult. So then I started doing trivia nights. I started doing, just last month, we had a tiny book making, so like
Uh-huh.
we're more focused now on just trying to get new adults in our library, and then we'll try to figure out more of like, should it have its own section, what should be in the section. So right now we're just trying to figure out like who would be interested in this, like the age ranges, like all that kind of stuff. So
So Haley, my question back to you would be then, what do you guys constitute as new adult? So since that's like you're targeting this specific audience,
Mhm.
is it those who are in college and just coming out of college? What are your parameters? Because when we set programs, because I'm also a programming librarian, we have age ranges. So like, what's the age ranges for that type of program?
So right now we are saying 18 to 35. Is around the age.
Wow.
Yes. Because then when it gets to be
Adults.
around, like my director noticed that when it gets to be around like 40 is when they tend to go to more of the adult programs. But we don't want to like say if you're at 30, you're cut off, you're not allowed to come
Mhm.
anymore, So that we're trying to like give it a wider reach of the ages. So yeah. So yeah, 18 to 35-ish.
So
Love that idea.
So my question back to you then also, because you said you started with the book club, right?
Yes.
So how do you choose what books to read for the book club?
So when I first started it, I was the one that was picking the books, and I picked books that have characters that were in their 20s. Like I did a lot of research so that we could relate to the characters that we were reading. Because I noticed a lot of times I would go to pick out a book from like YA and it was like a high schooler, and I'm like, I can't really relate to that. But then I couldn't really relate to somebody who's like 40 who's getting a divorce and like the adult books.
Yep, that's kind of where we're at that impasse too.
Exactly.
So okay.
So that's how we started it. But then we decided that it was going to be more of like everybody can choose like everybody has a month that they pick a book and then they get to. So now we're kind of going away from like the 20s characters and more of just, oh, I really want to read this book and this is my month, so we're all just going to read it now. So
Okay.
So I'm interested to see too. Do you have a collection development policy for like new adult materials?
I'm not 100% sure. I don't think so right now, because like I don't even really have like a budget yet either. Like this is also very new in our library. I would say it started in the past like 4 or 5 months. It's really been going. So yeah, so not yet, but I think that is in talks.
Okay. Yeah, because that's definitely I know Stephanie looked up I think Boston Public Library has actually does have like a new adult collection, and they actually had stated that's why when you said 35, like their age range, they called it, what did they say, adults who are coming out of adolescence. So I think it's like like that 18, 19, like early college, and then getting like into your first job, so like probably like early to mid 20s.
Yes. And that definitely makes sense. But like the town that I live in is so small. So if we wouldn't have anybody coming if we had such a small little age range, So that's why we kind of, but that sounds about like the perfect target age.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I was like, wait a minute, not to, to age us or anything, but I'm in that middle 30s age and I'm like, oh, I'm still new adult. Like I thought I made it. So that's why I was so shocked when you said that number.
So obviously the other concern with this too is that like books like A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you have read it, first book reads like a YA. And the first book is, and then you get to the second book and on, and it becomes like immediately very, very spicy, and even the themes in there and like the conflicts and stuff become very dark. So then it becomes like we don't want to come to a point where now everything that's like that is getting pushed into new adult, and now we're starting to censor, and like you know what I mean, like we're trying to also walk that fine line of like, okay, when does it become the point where now we're just policing these books, and which is obviously what we don't want to do. But yes, like it's ultimately is like how to get the books into the hands of the people who are interested, which are teens and new adults.
That's hard. I don't know. That's
right. That's exactly kind of where
very
we came
tricky.
from.
Wow.
Because then we also, came into the logistics of then, whose budget is it? who orders
Exactly.
it.
Oh, wait, someone's
Yeah.
raising.
I was gonna say things like that. So I definitely think that there's a lot of other nuances as well.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
see someone has their hand raised.
Oh.
Oh,
Hi
Steph.
there.
Thank you.
Stephanie, is this just kind of popcorn or is
Yes.
this?
Oh,
Steph,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're just flying by the seat of our pants, I think.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm new at my role. I'm a teen librarian and this is my first time serving teens as opposed to adults.
Mhm.
And I have heard about the book Genderqueer and how many people are banning it, and I wanted to add it to the collection, and I think I probably still will. But I saw in our consortium that some people catalog it as adult and some people catalog it as young adult. And I even borrowed the book to read it for myself. And I'm like, I do definitely see it going either way, but I also have read young adult books that also deal with like trans identity and body dysphoria and all this stuff. It's not depicted because it's not a graphic, because those weren't graphic novels, but like I wouldn't want somebody who is going through these things as a teen to think that like they have to wait until they're an adult to have to deal with or to ask these questions.
Exactly. I love that. And that's, at least in our main branch, we have a teen room. Because we predominantly have a lot of teens. Normally, we're building it back up after the pandemic. And I purposely have my nonfiction materials in that room because they need to feel safe enough to go and look at these sensitive topics if they don't feel comfortable asking someone for help and they just want to kind of like browse on their own. I mean, that book was also, I believe, challenged somewhere else in the state. I don't know if it was ever challenged here, but yeah, that's a whole nother beast.
Yeah.
That unfortunately we have to deal with.
Well, that's also another thing that a concern of our teen librarian. She has become very active in, the teen community within our county, and she has actually had a handful of teens approach her and say that they don't feel comfortable going into the adult section to find this information. So that's kind of what prompted another part of this discussion. Do we then, where would we house items that maybe are a little bit more advanced out of YA, but are still necessary or can be very prevalent for teens? So it's definitely a conversation that we're glad to be having, and it looks like we're not the only ones kind of having this issue. Kayla, I see you have your hand raised, and since I know you, I'm going to let you talk next.
Wow, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I do want to say, to bump back to a comment that was made earlier about policing items and kind of feeling like people can't access them. I'm not necessarily sure that having a centralized like collection area for these items would necessarily be policing them. I think, like as stated earlier, those age ranges would still have access to them. It would just be more in a location that is like together, so they can see that they're all together. I do agree with like the age ranges you guys were saying, like 18 to like 25, like late 20s makes a lot more sense, because as I get closer to that age, I feel less like a new adult. But definitely A Court of Roses and Thorns is one of those very, very tricky topics. We have it in our YA section too, and I've been kind of like pushing to move it because I don't necessarily think that it belongs over there. But keeping those items in a space where these newer adults or like older teens feel comfortable to access them and don't feel like they're like blowing around through the adult section and they're very uncomfortable, it definitely makes sense to keep them that way. But I also think that the budget issue comes into fact, because who's to buy those? Is youth services purchasing them, or is adult services purchasing them? Are you creating an entire new collection area for those items? So there are a little tricky subjects, but it's I don't think that centralizing those items is policing them now. I will stand by that point. I think it's better to have them together than it is to have them separate. That's just my take.
No, thank you.
No.
I appreciate it.
I will say that I tend to agree with Kayla's point of view on that. That's kind of where me and Stephanie had a little bit of a debate, and where we were like, let's bring in some other people, because we didn't know, we couldn't come. We ourselves came to this impasse, where I thought that this conversation, like I remember when we were young adults, young adult wasn't really a thing. It wasn't really a section. So we had that same kind of mentality or that same kind of situation, and then young adult kind of became its thing. I think this is the beginning of new adult becoming it's a new YA. It's just, I think it's going to be an additional, I think it's going to emerge into being its own. Right now it's being considered like a genre. I don't really think it's a genre. I think it's a collection. It's a collection that is pertinent to a certain portion of a community. I'm not saying you limit access. That is not the name of public librarianship. You do not limit access, right? But I do think that, like what Kayla's saying, housing it together isn't always necessarily policing. It's not censoring. It's keeping like-minded things like-minded together. Same with, we wouldn't let juvenile into a teen program. It's kind of the same argument. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? Feel free to just jump in too. You don't have to necessarily raise your hand. I know that we all feel like we should. I see here Terry put in the comments, if you're making a separate section, can the budget be shared between adults and teens? No different than separating YA books and children's. That's definitely a good thing. I think it depends too on the library system, and the locations. So I think that it really depends. I think it depends who's also overseeing that collection. Is this something, how we have YA librarians? Do you create a new a new adult librarian position, or whole department? I don't know. Is it this? Let's see. Marissa says she's actually a new adult librarian in Middletown Township. It's very new at our library. We have been trying to figure it out, calling it new adult or Gen Z. So I would be a little bit leery with calling it Gen Z, just because that really does pigeon a certain age range. So some Gen Zers, like, it depends on your definition. Like, technically I'm a millennial, but I do read also some new adult books. So I don't know if I would name it off of a generation. That makes it very specific.
I think I found labels on books that are considered new adult. Yeah, so the label thing is also something that I've personally thought of as well. I mean, there's certain things that we don't label. I mean, there's certain books, I guess, that we wouldn't label to shut out or discriminate. But I think as far as like genres go, because I mean, there are some libraries that have like sci-fi, mystery, romance, whatever. And if new adult is just one of those genres, I don't really see a problem with that. The finding the list of new adult authors is another a little issue in itself, because like I said, there's no one like site where it was like, okay, if it follows these parameters, then it's this. But I think generally we've kind of been going off of the age of the protagonist and the things that the protagonist is going through in the book that are very similar to people in the early 20s, if that makes any sense.
Well, and so I'm going to throw this example out there because, again, youth service is an adult, right? So when we go by that type of definition, though, about protagonist age, main characters, things of that nature, a lot of us will say, oh, that could potentially still be YA or new adult. So if we're using that, then the book 50 Shades of Grey is technically new adult because the female protagonist is actually still in college in the first one, where everybody, I think across the board, it was already agreed when that series was purchased, that was automatically put in adult. When that movie series came out, it automatically is rated R, so it's in adult sections. So again, it's a very what parameters are you choosing? Because it can be. And I see here we have somebody said spicy. Well, what is your definition of spicy versus mine? So there's no concrete, like, and that's where we're having a hard time. So I don't know if anybody else has opinions on that, if they want to verbalize, maybe outside of the chat, because I'm having a hard time reading everything and talking at the same time.
Wait, yeah, here we go. But eliminating and centralizes. Collections, fine labels sound great. Yeah, centralizing is great.
I do agree with what Mary wrote here to everybody about necessarily limiting. I've noticed a lot of people did mention if we kind of call it like Gen Z, it does, for those that like I have young kids, they're technically Gen Alpha. So when Gen Alpha becomes new adult, will we have to continue to rename it with each generation? Like that seems like a little bit of a lot of work too. So I do see, and that's kind of why we wanted to have this conversation. Mackenzie, you have your hand raised, so go ahead. You could unmute yourself. Let's see what. Yes, there you go.
So NA is very hard right now anyway, in general, because I feel like it's such a new topic that even if you go out into bookstore, it's hard to find those. So it's like hard to separate that, because I think publishers and all them are still trying to figure out themselves what NA is, what new adult is. So it's not just us struggling. I think it's everybody struggling, because, back when Sarah started writing Court of Thorns and Roses, it was YA, but now the publisher actually switched it to adult. They republished the books, new covers, and they switched it to adult, because as she kept continuing the series, it became more spicy, as Stephanie said. So it's hard, I think, because you don't know what an author's thinking. They could say, oh, it's going to start as YA, but then again, it goes down that timeline and then changes. So I think new adult is very hard to pinpoint, because nobody right now seems to know what's supposed to be in there. I feel like it's everybody collectively, because I'm on like the online book community a lot on Facebook, TikTok, all that, and it's but there's hard to label what is NA, what's adult, what's YA, unless it's younger YA. Like they're all kind of, it's hard to just find those lines right now. I feel like I think everybody's struggling with that, especially with these more indie authors popping up who are more spicy writers. Are they allow them going if they're adult, but some are like, no, they're NA, they're new adult. Like it's hard to define those lines right now.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Mackenzie, because that is really also for me, because I'm also the social media coordinator at the library. So obviously I'm on it quite frequently, that like all the time. It's actually obnoxious. This is how people are getting their books. So as public librarians, we want to provide the materials that our public want, that our communities are asking for. So that's kind of a lot of these indie authors now. A lot of these authors that are being, they are saying they're new adult, or their publishers are saying they're new adult. So now where do we as librarians, we want to get these for our patrons. This is what they're asking for, but where are we putting it? Because it doesn't fall within our collection development. So that's why we're starting this dialogue, because we're here to serve our communities, right? So that's what we want to do. But where do we serve our communities and still are within our collection development policies and things of that nature?
As far as, so Sheila asked, or she said, publishers. Yes, I was going to ask who they are targeting. And I feel like they also they target to the people that they think will be interested in it, but that doesn't also necessarily align with the age appropriateness, if that's a word. So that's kind of, I guess, part of the issue. But Dana brought up a very good question. She said, could there be a book that wouldn't be spicy and still be considered new adult? And then is there a male readership in this category? And I'm not really seeing much of a male readership, to be honest with you.
And see, I see differently. I think you would be surprised. I actually, I'm a very big romance reader myself, personally. And there actually are some authors you would be surprised actually are male. So I don't know if it's as strong, but I definitely think that this is something that is widely popular, has become even, it continues to grow. So if we want to evolve with it, we need to start talking about it now. I see, and no, I don't think new adult necessarily means a spice level. I do think that's important. But I think it's also situations. Generally speaking, I'm going to use an example. I don't know how familiar everybody is, but there's Hannah Grace's Icebreaker is a very popular book that's on Book Talk. I would consider it new adult. It's about the female and male protagonists are both in college. And I started reading and I enjoyed it. About halfway through, I DNF'd the book because I just could not relate to the characters because I am so much older than them. I just was like, this is not something that I can see for myself as a reader. So I think that's also, as I say, so it's not necessarily, don't get me wrong, the book is spicy. So I'm just putting that out there now from me to you, but I don't think it's necessarily spice. I think it's also how you relate to the characters, the situations they're in. Can somebody who is 15 years old relate to somebody who's 22 and just graduating college, getting their new job, this, that, and like those life experiences are different. So that's where I think too, it doesn't necessarily have to be spicy or salacious. It could be just the plot itself that, not that a 15-year-old can't read about that. It's just that they don't necessarily can relate to it. The same with, I don't think, generally speaking, a 22-year-old wants to read a book like we had mentioned earlier about a 55-year-old who's getting divorced and is in the second, trying to have her second go at romance. It's a lot. So
I think yeah, Linda, I'm more of the mindset that you have is that yeah, I think kids know what they want, and we are a public library, and they are allowed to come in here, and they are allowed to go into our adult section, what have you. But yeah, I think most of the time they do know when they're ready for something a little bit more advanced, and maybe more ready than their parents say or guardians would like them to be. So I agree with that, and that's a really good point to bring up. Some libraries have teen, tween, YA, and adult, a copy of the same book in each section. That was also something that we considered as well. Just having one in each section was going to be an in-house call. Yeah. And that's the thing, is that like I think a lot of it is going to be an in-house call or per library call. And we just want to make sure that we have something to back it up. On the other hand, is that how we learn empathy and broaden our worldviews, reading outside what we can relate to? Yeah. I love it. Okay. I think Ayula's hand was up first. Okay.
Yep.
Thank Christine.
It's Aola like Crayola.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
It's okay.
thank you.
Okay.
That is so, I'll always remember that now though.
Yeah. So it sounds like so far folks have been talking about realistic fiction, but I think another consideration is fantasy, or things that like are so, because with young adult we tend to use like middle school, high school as like, oh, if the protagonists are in this life stage, it's young adult, or if the protagonists are in college or like starting their first jobs, then they're new adult. But if it's something like fantasy or sci-fi in like in a separate world or in a future world where those things are not at play, I feel like that makes it all the more murky. For example, like there was the book Aragon, which took place, or the character, I think he was 15 or 14 at the start of it, and maybe like 18 by the end. But like there wasn't any concept of school in that society. It was just like adventuring. And then I think also the Hunger Games, like there was school in that, but that definitely wasn't the central focus. And like that's a book, series that people pretty solidly put in YA in spite of the like violence that's in it and like the implications of being in that society.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point.
Yeah.
I agree with you, because for the most part, we have just been talking about like romance and realistic fiction,
Yeah.
but we kind of forget about even like the fantasy, but even horror. I
Yeah.
mean, there's certain horror that is, I guess, appropriate or
Yeah.
more graphic than others. Even those dark books that are just really bleak and have a lot of heavy topics, because I often think about too, Ellen Hopkins, when she came out with all of those books about like the kids that were like on drugs. And those books are pretty dark, but they are in the YA section. So it does, like you said, kind of get murky, where it's like, okay, well, where's the line that's drawn? What is there a line that is drawn?
Yeah.
Is it more just towards who is this book going to be for, and less about what is written?
And Christine, I know you have your hand raised, so.
Well, kind of like what Ayla said about the Hunger Games and the violence, I think violence gets a bigger pass than sexual content does. And I know I used to read YA books all the time because I was screening them before giving them to my kid. And I let her have stuff with bad language. I let her have stuff with violence. It was only, if characters were having sex, I said, nope, you got to wait a few more years. But I think that it is a good point. Like she actually recommended a book to me last year called, what was it? The Secret History. And that's a Donna Tartt, I think, is the author, and it's about college students who get involved in a murder. And it's kind of dark. They're not always nice people. And I don't think it's the kind of thing that would have appealed to her when she was a young adult in her teens in high school, but now she's in college and can relate, to those kind of characters. So I don't think that those kinds of books being separated as a category is limiting at all. I think it's just helping make it more accessible to, that age group that is going to appreciate it.
Yeah, I do agree. And again, I don't really think any of this is an argument of access. I think we're all on the same page where we would never say that they're not allowed to take items, that they're not. I think it's is it appropriate? Like, where is it our professional responsibility to make an appropriate decision on where things should be housed? Or I was gonna say, it's not censoring, it's just it's making it so it's accessible to those that most need it. Again, I don't know if a new adult would be overly comfortable going into a section that's more childish, right? They're ready to be adults. Same where a teen's not necessarily feels appropriate or comfortable going into the adult section. It's the same argument, just vice versa. It's just backwards. But I do agree with what you're saying, where violence does get a pass. I had made that comment time and time again. I'm like, I love how we're 100% okay with Hunger Games. I mean, these are kids killing kids. The goal is they're killing everybody to win. And we're like, that's great. This is wonderful. Go Katniss. So I agree that it definitely has a pass. That's why I'm saying new adult isn't just spice level. I do think we should have these conversations about these fantasy books, these sci-fi books, horror, what constitutes
manga and
and
graphics.
Yeah,
I just mentioned
what constitutes like Stephen King as adult versus somebody else that has a YA book that would be published that's just as twisted and graphic and fear-inducing. So I think that there's a much bigger conversation we need to have. So to say,
yeah, Iola. I'm the same way. Yeah, I've also read books. I mean, when I was a teenager, I loved reading books about like people who were like drug addicts or dying. I don't know why, but I guess it just made me feel better as a teen, but in no way did it have any kind of like negative effect on me personally, of course. In my experience, adults do not come into the children's section, and teen younger adults do appreciate having a slightly separate space.
Yeah, I definitely think
Okay.
this is a bigger conversation as well. I see here, you know, we've talked a little bit about publishers and stuff. It's obviously a bigger conversation than just libraries. It's critics and reviewers, it's influencers, it's publishers, it's authors themselves, it's booksellers. It's a larger community, but we know that we are some of the most forward-facing part of this book community, right? You know, we're here to serve our community, and it's our faces that are out there. It's us making these decisions, as opposed to somebody kind of behind the scenes, like you bought your book at Amazon, like, you know, you're not speaking to Jeff Bezos. So I think, especially in the world today where books are being challenged left and right, we just want to do our due diligence of making access, but making it also appropriate access. So does anybody else have any ideas or thoughts that they're thinking? Because also too, this does fall into not just collection development, but then the new you know, transition into the programming. So I think too, like I don't know. I want some. Anybody else have anything else they want to say?
Oh, that's very nice, Dana. I like that. That's awesome. She said that she has a small sign in the YA department that is dedicated to nonfiction, encouraging patrons to go to the adult nonfiction department if they aren't finding what they're looking for. So that's very nice.
I definitely I like that. I don't know if other libraries fall under the same thing. We have a lot of people that don't read our signs. So I'm wondering if there's another way we can, you know, or those of us who serve, you know, populations that maybe speak multiple languages, certain signages like that, like how maybe something else. I'm real big on symbols and symbolization and things like that. Anything that anybody has to share, I think would be, because we don't want people to feel like they're not being included. That is not what we want to do. So is there any other suggestions in that way that anybody's like been thinking of, read, heard, or has already implemented?
Do many of the libraries separate their YA and adult nonfiction?
That's a good question, Rebecca. Here in the Gloucester County Library system, at least in our main branch, we do actually have a dedicated nonfiction collection for adult, YA, as well as juvenile. So say Kayla says theirs is entirely separate. Looks like most everybody is kind of yeah, we also have YA bio separate. Now Haley, yours is together. I'm interested with that, considering the fact that you are the one that has spoken up about starting this like new adult programming, how to get this specific generation and age range into the library and feel like they're being included and welcomed back. I'm wondering if have you considered moving? I don't know, again, I don't know quite how big your library is, but did you want to maybe talk or touch on that anymore?
Yeah, that would be interesting to talk to our young adult librarian about that, because yeah, like our nonfiction section, our YA is just sporadically thrown out throughout the Dewey system. And so, but I'll definitely mention that to her to see if we can create a separate section for that.
Yeah,
I don't think she ever really thought about it like that.
yeah,
but we a library, so I'm not sure where we'd be able to put it, but
well, that's one thing I know Stephanie can definitely speak more on than myself. I know she was very passionate about keeping ours separate. We had a small discussion about kind of merging and including it all, but she was really the advocate for it. So I don't know if maybe you want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think our director wanted to interfile them because I think she wanted to provide adult readers who were lower level readers able to read nonfiction.
Yeah, that makes
I mean,
sense.
don't, which does make sense. However, I firmly believe that the YA nonfiction should have its own section, because you don't know if you happen to have a teen that comes in here that, you know, is suffering from bulimia or is pregnant, and is trying to look for information. And if she just happens to go into the adult section to find a book like that, and let's say she sees like her next door neighbor, or she sees somebody like that, I mean, that's, and you know, you can imagine anything that might ensue after that. It's also too, I mean, we have such a dedicated adult section in the library. We have such a dedicated children's section in the library. And to just kind of say, oh, we're just going to put these YA books here, it also kind of sends a message to the teens that we don't care enough for them to come in as well. In my opinion, it says, you know, oh, adults get this, children's get this, teens, you just get like the crumbs, basically. You know what I mean? So, and that's also another reason why I wanted to have those books in a dedicated space just for them, because even if we only get 1 or 2 teens or just a couple, it means so much more to those teens. And teens are a hard age. They really are. I mean, they're going through a lot. We've all been there, and they're a very hard age. And, you know, they're not going to come in droves like we might get the families or even the older adults. You might only get like 2 or 3, but the relationship you have with them is, I feel, so much more impactful than the quality or the quantity that will be coming in. Like, I feel like the quality, love it, you know, and there's a whole thing about them having their own safe space. My teen librarian goes to a GSA book or GSA club at our high school. And they're like, we want to make sure before we come to your library that we're going to feel safe, because they often feel unsafe in so many situations. And, you know, for us to be able to provide that and give them and provide a space for them with books that they want and information, and just a place where they can gather and be themselves in a world that's just so cruel right now, means more to them than anything.
Yeah, but the argument the argument you just made for teens, I would make the same for new adults.
Oh yeah.
I'd make the same argument that these are, you know, because when we say adults 18, well, what does an 18-year-old necessarily life experience wise have in common with a 65-year-old? They don't. They really, hopefully, they might in some way, in some circumstances, and I know reality. We all have our own struggles, right? But in most cases, the maturity level, the life experiences, this, that, and the third, they just don't. So I do think that same argument we're making for these YA collections needs to be made for this other part of our service population. We worry about seniors. Why do we take seniors out of the adult population? Because they have their own needs. It's the same for new adults. It really is. I remember going into college, coming out of college, having these nuances that aren't the same. And when I, you know, people, you know, oh, you're so young, you're still a kid, but you weren't. So I think that those same arguments can be made for this other collection.
And I agree. I mean, you know, you think about like 20, 30 years ago, like my parents, they were fresh out of high school, got married, had kids, had a family, got a job. Like, you know what I mean? There wasn't this whole, like, now your 20s are very different. You go to college, you have experiences, you go through all of like these certain little things that, you know, they didn't do back then, you know? So I think there's more of a need for it now as the times have changed.
And I think sadly to admit, I do think libraries tend to be sometimes not at the forefront of certain things. So I would hate for us to have to play catch up for something so important.
Yes. And unfortunately, libraries only have so much space, which really stinks too.
So much space, so much money. So I know that it definitely, that's why we were bringing in some of these things about like collection development. Who's responsible for, who's the programming responsible for? Is the programming responsible for children's? departments, or is it for adults, or do you make it a combination of the two? You know, some people wear many hats at the library, so it is different at each institution. But I don't think that that means that we don't try and find a consensus amongst the profession. So
This has been very enlightening.
yeah, it honestly, the more that this is why it was so important to the two of us to reach out.
Oh, okay. So you don't unfiltered when the teens can be the same, and sometimes there can be a clash. Yeah,
It's
Yeah.
definitely
of course, limited by space and finances. Yeah.
there's a lot. There's, you know, if we had infinite amount of funding and infinite amount of space and time, there's so much we could do, right? And I think all of us are in that mentality of wanting to do so. So I definitely think that, you know,
And teens, I mean, you get more teens that come to the library. They, for the most part, will come by themselves. And when they get together, yes, they can be noisy. And you can't.
so can us.
Yeah,
we're
that's true.
adults. I think.
That's true. But and that's just like the inevitability of it, right? Because teens like to come to the library and hang out, where like maybe adults, they come to the library, do programming, they job search, whatever. And children cause chaos. But having our teens have their own section with a door closed has also helped with our patrons. It's reduced the amount, the complaining from patrons that, you know, these teens are acting up, and then often teens feel vilified because they're just being teens.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that there's those nuances with each age range, each age group. You know, heaven forbid we have story time in the middle of the library because we needed our meeting room spaces were getting renovated, or somebody else needed it. And, you know, and then it's like, oh, those kids are being so loud. It's everybody has a right to be at the library. At least that's the mentality I think we lead with. I think most public librarians lead with the same thing. Christine, we understand we're very loud.
Yes. It's good and bad. It's good because they have their own space, but there's no room to grow. Yes. I agree.
I definitely, I just, we don't know what the right answer is. But I think that being able to openly discuss these things, that's important.
Yeah, and hopefully we gave some of you at least a different perspective or different ideas, or, you know, kind of got the ball. I'm already thinking that maybe instead of like doing this whole big change, we start something simple like a display, like you know, that's just an ongoing thing to kind of, and that could be an easy way for us to kind of gauge interest and see if anyone's going to bite, and who's interested, and, you know, who's taking these books, and
that's
which books are being taken.
Yeah, that's another good idea too. And I like the idea of having maybe a book club, or I like that, Haley.
Created bookmarks explaining new adult. I actually did do something very similar to that, Haley. I created a book recommend list. We have them all over for youth services, things of that nature, based on like ages and appropriateness for reading levels. I did do that based off of Book Talk. You know, popular books off of Book Talk that are adult and new adult. Because I think too, again, I don't like to limit access, but a lot of adults aren't on Book Talk. They're not on TikTok. So I definitely think that those small ways of trying to get them, and I actually noticed I was helping out at the circulation desk, and one of my seniors from one of my other programs I have actually took the brochure, and I was pretty excited about it. So it's a nice way of trying to bridge those gaps, right? I'm very big on intergenerational programming. So I think this is also a way of trying to bridge those gaps, because again, they all still have access. Just who is the target audience for each.
Oh yes, if you could share the bookmarks, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if Stephanie has a sign up list. I'm sure she does. But Stephanie, if you would be able to collectively make that. I don't know where Stephanie is. But if you could collectively make that, and maybe we
Sorry,
can
I'm here. Yes.
okay. I was like, where'd she go? But if you could collectively make that, that
Yes,
would be
no,
great.
I'm still here.
Yeah, because I think too, this is something that is going to be a continuously ongoing discussion as we kind of move forward with collection development, with programming, and with trying to target that age range and making things appropriate for them. Because no, they might not be super into, you know, the craft programs, because everybody that attends your craft program is, you know, 55 years and older. Where they might be more inclined to come to an upcycling program. Maybe it's just thinking outside the box. So and thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.
Sheila, we try to be lively. We are the most lively at the library. So Christine can also concur with that.
Oh, okay. Steph is having tech issues. Okay. Well, I mean, we thank you guys. I mean, we knew that we wanted this to be a very informal discussion, more of you having to listen to us.
Sheila.
I can tell. So we're really appreciative for all the comments and suggestions that were given to us, because I mean, there's even some things that we didn't think about, or it kind of makes us double think or about certain things. So thank you, everybody.
Yes,
we really appreciate it.
Yeah, because this really came out of a necessity for us specifically here. And one, it's nice to know that we're not maybe the only ones thinking about it. But it's, like I said, it's great to get, you know, the opinions and bounce ideas off of everybody in the profession. So we got as much out of this as you guys did, hopefully.